Hello everybody and welcome to another Sponge Chat. My name is Jim Fuller. I'm a teacher, trainer, manager and blogger. And if this is your first time here, thank you very much for joining us. I just finished speaking to Matt Ellman, who, as many of you will know, is the co-author of From Teacher to Trainer, the new book by Cambridge University Press. And we had a really insightful Sponge Chat. Focus on teacher training. So for those of you EOT professionals looking to move them from teaching or somewhere else into teacher training, I think this Sponge Chat will be really useful. We looked at Matt's journey, of course, into teacher training and some of the motivations there, and also on some of the nuances in the sense that there's not always a clear-cut line between being a teacher and being a teacher educator, and often there are times when the lines are blurred. So to speak. What else did we speak about? We spoke about some of the difficulties with teacher training and the importance of impact, and how often in the early years of being a teacher educator, this is something that's often looked over, and we also acknowledge the difficulties of measuring impact. Of course, we looked at Matt and Pickett looked on his book, From Teacher to Trainer, and Matt spoke about some of the things that went into creating this. And then, of course, we looked at the usual stuff that we always look at. So we looked at some advice for those of you that are looking to move into teacher training. We also looked at some brilliant book recommendations, two of which we haven't had on here before. So I'm looking forward to putting them onto the list and actually getting to read them. Before you go, if you do like these Sponge Chats, please give us a like, please subscribe. There will be more coming out shortly, hopefully, if I have time. You can see I'm here in the office working today, not in my office at home. So very busy at the moment. An update, I am finishing off the core module of the NILMA. So I've been super busy, that's why we haven't had too much content out lately, but there will be more. And you need to click and subscribe to see everything, okay? Without further ado, let's get into it. I hope you enjoy this one and we'll see you soon. Bye. Hi Matt, lovely to see you.
Hey Jim, yeah, good to see you too.
First of all, thank you very much for being here. It's this afternoon, I suppose, in Spain. It was midday in the UK. Thank you very much for being here. You're a very busy man. It's great to finally get you on here. Today we're going to go into a Sponge Chat, and for those that are perhaps new to Sponge Chats, basically what it is, it started all from an email. I got an email. It's a few years ago now, and someone asked me how did I get into teacher training, and I came to the realization that for all trainers it's kind of a little bit different. I'm sure you're going to tell us about how you got into it in a sec. And so really I'm hoping that these Sponge Chats, now they're focusing on teacher training, materials development, all sorts of things within the EOT industry, but I'm specifically hoping with teacher trainers that it provides teachers and EOT professionals with an outlook on perhaps some of the ways in which they can extend their career within our industry and hopefully stay within the industry, and explore elements of teacher training. So without further ado, I'm going to push it over to you, Matt. Why don't we start with the big question? Who is Matt? We'll always start with the big question. So who is Matt?
So Matt is, I'm a teacher and teacher trainer. I live just outside Cambridge in the UK. And I've been involved in ELT for about 12 years now. So I worked I started working in the UK, then I worked in Spain, in Madrid, then I moved to Malaysia and worked in KL for a while. And then I moved back, and now I work for Cambridge University Press and Assessment. And my job with them involves delivering training and also managing training projects. So it's been really good. I mean, pre-pandemic, that role kind of took me to dozens of different countries, delivering training and meeting teachers. And obviously in the past 2 years, I haven't traveled as much, but still delivering training online and still managing training projects in various different countries.
Yeah, I remember when we met. I can't remember if it was 2019, 2020. It was
I think
just
it was 2020 because it was just before
before the pandemic, right?
pandemic hit. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember, and you were talking about some of the training projects that you've done, kind of internationally, and I thought that was really amazing. And I didn't know you taught in Spain, though. I didn't know that you'd worked in Madrid. That's interesting. Were you working with, for example, International House, or was it like another academy?
Yeah. No, I worked for IH Madrid for 2 years.
Brilliant. Yeah, Madrid, wild place.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No. Well, everything's kind of returning to normal here, I suppose. I suppose very similar to the UK. Hopefully we get some. I mean, we're only now just returning to face-to-face conferences. They're quite rare still. Everything's still online. So hopefully we get to have more of these face-to-face conferences. I mean, you're as well as being a teacher and teacher trainer, you are a new father as well.
I am.
So I don't suppose you went to DipTESOL.
Actually, I did. Yeah, I got
wow.
a special dispensation from my wife to go there. I was there for 2 nights. Yeah, I caught up on a lot of sleep, and I had a talk to give, so I gave my talk. But yeah, it's the situation, I guess, here is slightly different because we just pretend that COVID doesn't exist in the UK.
Right.
We're kind of back to normal, and everybody gets sick once in a while, and kind of just pretend that it's okay.
As they say in Spain, es lo que hay. It is what it is, right? So
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, I want to go back to sort of teacher, Matt, before you went into teacher training. What was the kind of the moment where you thought, okay, I want to move into teacher training, and how did you go about that?
That's a good question. I don't know if there was a moment. So I guess the kind of precursor to that, if there was a moment, was first just kind of really feeling like I kind of found my place or found my calling as a teacher. So I love teaching, and so I was just kind of I was just really into that for several years at the beginning. So I did a lot of professional development as a teacher. I read a lot of books. The great thing about working at IH was that there were workshops every week. You can be trained for hours every week. So I did my Delta there as well at IH Madrid. I did that pretty quickly. But I don't think I really had a kind of plan to become a teacher trainer at that point.
Right.
But when I left Spain and went to Malaysia, I was working for the British Council there. I guess that there were more opportunities then to do things like mentoring, or to deliver workshops, and it kind of became something that I was doing more and more, and which I really enjoyed as well. Yeah, and I guess in some respects it was kind of a way to keep challenging myself, because by that time I'd been teaching for I don't know, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Going into teacher training was a good way to keep challenging myself and kind of put into practice a lot of the stuff that I learned in that whole period of developing as a teacher.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting you mentioned Delta. I believe you have an MA as well, right? If I'm correct, in applied linguistics and language teaching. I'd like to go a little bit further into that as well. You said that obviously you were reading quite a lot of books and that you did your Delta with IH. Was that something that you heard about and then you thought, okay, that's what I need to do as a teacher, or were you kind of pushed to do it by the teacher training staff there, or?
No, I remember asking around about that after my first year of teaching. I had an observation, and the guy that observed me had just finished his Delta, so we had a good chat about that. And I think I always felt that like the CELTA was kind of for me anyway, it was like a crash course, and it kind of got me prepared to teach, but it wasn't really. There were still a lot of gaps.
Yeah.
So I felt from quite early on that I needed to do more. So yeah, no one pushed me to do it. It was I guess doing it in Spain, in Madrid, that was kind of my earliest opportunity to do it. So I did.
Yeah, brilliant. And your experience, positive overall?
My experience was great, and I know lots of people have not had a great experience on the Delta. I think what really helped was that it was being in Spain and being at IH. It was a face-to-face thing, so I wasn't doing distance Delta. We had input sessions every week. The trainers were amazing. My colleagues on the course were amazing. So it was, I had a really good experience, and I guess also I was perhaps better prepared than most people for the course because of all the reading that I'd done.
Yeah.
In the preceding couple of years. So I loved it, and I found it had a massive benefit on my teaching as well. It really improved me as a teacher, which is the point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I loved every aspect of it. I did mine over distance though, and that was interesting. I remember speaking to Sandy Millen about her experience, and she not very positive about it at all.
Really, that's interesting, because obviously she's, someone that's as steeped in, in ELT as you or I. So it's, I mean, I can understand why the distance thing doesn't work for people.
Yeah.
I think that's true. I think that's true of a lot of teacher training, that so much of the best teacher training is collaborative and involves kind of being with other teachers, not just in an online space, but in a school space, in a classroom space. And that's, it's a privilege to be able to do that, especially now, post-pandemic. But I think where that is possible, it's probably better.
Yeah, definitely. Well, going on to that then, if we switch to sort of the teacher training focus now, moving into teacher training itself, so we'll focus on the sort of the first year, 2-3 years of teacher training. What challenges did you come across within these? I mean, we like to say early career teachers, but I suppose we can also say early career teacher educators. Within these first few years, what are some of the issues or some of the problems that you came up against?
So I guess there wasn't like a clear line between being a teacher and being a trainer.
Right.
So that's one of the trying to manage those two identities, that you're still teaching, and teaching is hard work, and you're busy. So often the kind of trainer stuff that I was doing was on top of teaching.
Yeah.
So that was a challenge. I remember when I was still in Madrid, one of my first kind of teacher trainer experiences was running a reading group.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so it was kind of it was a monthly thing, I think, and then every month a different person would volunteer to find a text and share that, and then lead the discussion. So I remember doing that, and looking back on it, it was I was definitely in teacher mode still. So I think I thought that it went well because everyone was talking. There was lots of discussion, some interesting points came up. But I don't know how many takeaways there were for the people that attended, and I don't know how much impact it would have had on their teaching. So for me, I was thinking, it was great. Everyone was talking, everybody was engaged, job done. But I think, as I say, now looking back, my focus definitely wasn't on impacts then, and on kind of having on the participants making lasting changes to what they were doing in the classroom. And then further, I mean, that first thing was kind of an example of a trend that continued, which is that you have to try and find your own opportunities for doing teacher training. I think initially, at least that was my experience, that no one kind of says, well, like I said, there's not that clear line where you get a new job and suddenly you're a trainer. You have to try and carve out opportunities for yourself to run a session like that, or to mentor new teachers, or to volunteer to deliver a workshop. So that's kind of what happened for the next couple of years. When I went to Malaysia, I worked in a brand new branch of the British Council there, and so there were quite a few. I worked alongside quite a few relatively inexperienced teachers that needed some support.
Yeah.
So that was good. I got that chance to mentor them. And the other thing that happened there was that we had quarterly training days. So you'd have like a whole day where all the teachers would get together, and there'd be workshops going on, and people volunteered to deliver those workshops. So they were kind of sessions delivered by your peers. So I volunteered to run a lot of those as well.
Mm-hmm.
But as I say, I think the big challenge was just to create those opportunities. And I think I was quite lucky working at, with organizations like IH and the British Council, that you kind of have those.
Yeah.
And if you're working somewhere smaller, or in a slightly different context, then that could be a lot more difficult.
Definitely. I mean, you touched on two really interesting points there. There's no line between being a teacher and a teacher trainer sometimes. I remember I was speaking to Tom Kittle about this, and he said, really, anybody, any teacher, any AOT professional can be a teacher educator, depending on some of the roles that they take on, whether it's through peer observations and sharing lesson ideas or critiquing an idea. So for many teachers, they're potentially taking on some of those training roles with it informally anyway. But I also agree that for those that are looking perhaps to move into a more formal role of teacher training, there are, at least on the surface, in my opinion, not many visible opportunities. And I think that for many of us, we've had to push for those opportunities or look for them. And at least in my experience, that's what it was like. And for many of the teachers that I've spoken, many of the trainers, the educators that I've spoken with, it's very similar.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And there are not, when it comes to, if you're looking on kind of job sites for trainer roles, there aren't that many. And I think that's because there aren't that many of those roles anyway, but also because a lot of them are kind of, they're kind of given to people in-house. If like a vacancy opens up for a new CELTA trainer, it's likely to go to somebody who's already teaching there and can kind of move into that role gradually. So
you also mentioned this quite a lot, and you actually mentioned this quite a lot in a lot of your presentations online, some of the blog posts that you write, about this idea of impact. And you draw it back to, I believe, to the INSPIRE model for teacher training and development from Richardson and Agioli, I think it is.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'd like to go a little bit further into that and perhaps relate it to some of our experiences. I think one of my first probably year of teacher training is this idea of impact. I wasn't even thinking about. I was thinking about getting teachers in and focusing on something, and now I look back on that and say, okay, was that effective or not? And from my own experience, I'd say that's probably one of the biggest challenges that I suppose most educators would have to face. It's interesting though, in terms of evaluating impact, what are some of the things that you do now in terms of evaluating impact on training?
Evaluating impact's tough because it's such a long-term kind of process. So I think there's kind of a prevailing narrative in a lot of teacher training that what your goal or your like what good teacher training looks like is that you give the trainees or you give the participants stuff that they can use in their next lesson. And I hear this all the time, And there is a grain of truth to that, but I think there's also I think that's also quite a problematic idea, because first of all, because it kind of suggests that the trainees come to the training room, or they come to your training, and they're kind of passive recipients of, this activity or that technique or whatever.
Just take it, go
yeah
on.
yeah and learning's not like that, right? They're coming there to learn, and we wouldn't expect that in our English classroom. You expect your English learners to kind of get stuck in and get involved and bring something to the process, and the same thing needs to happen when teachers are being trained as well. So I have a problem with that kind of idea. But I guess one positive with that is that it's relatively easy to evaluate impact. That you could potentially go to the next lesson that those teachers deliver and see, did they use the activity? But there's no long-term benefit there. Even if they do use the activity, you don't know if they've used it correctly. Have they used it appropriately? Do they understand why to use it, or when to use it, or how to adapt it for their classrooms? So yeah, the idea of impact that I have now is that we're looking for teachers to make kind of sustained changes to what they do. And the precise nature of those changes is really for those teachers to decide, because they're the ones who know their students and their classrooms and their context best. But because it's a sustained change, you need to kind of be asking them what the impact was, I don't know, a few weeks, a few months down the line, to see if they're doing things differently. And in practice, that kind of rarely happens, either because you're not in contact with those trainees anymore. Maybe you deliver a session, or you deliver a course, and it's ended, and now they've kind of gone back out into the world. Or just because they're busy. Even if you kind of sent a questionnaire, they may not have the time to be able to engage with it. So what happens kind of instead is the teacher's feelings about the training, and we kind of use that as a proxy. So the training's finished, and you say to the teacher, do you feel that you could do things differently? Have you got a plan to do things differently now? And if they say yes, then you can accept that as the best that you could hope for at that point.
That's interesting. I think it also depends on potentially the type of training and development that you're involved in. I was speaking to Kanduk Kutik, and she presented this idea that if there are teachers that are looking to move into educating, or roles that are educating other teachers, you need to think about whether that's an in-house internal development sort of aspect, or on courses such as CELTA, Delta, DipTESOL, these sorts of things. And I think personally, I think that they're two quite different training areas. Like for myself, I've never been involved on training on a CELTA course or on a Delta course. Not yet anyway. It's one thing I'd like to move into. But I really enjoy working over a year, or even a number of years, with the teachers that we have within the academy. And I feel that with these elements, especially from the Inspire model, being able to bring them in, working with the teacher over 2 years, you get more of, I feel that we get more of those opportunities.
Definitely.
To evaluate impact, but also to create it so that it's individualized and needs-based. As a trainer that works, you work with groups going around the world, and in online things. Does this sort of raise questions about the importance we give to these one-off conferences, these one-off workshop sessions? Like, how should we view them then, as trainers going into these?
I think if you're a trainer on that kind of thing, if you're a trainer on a course or in a conference, and you don't have direct contact then with the teacher's day-to-day environment, one of your roles is to encourage the teacher to make the connection between what you're doing and the environment that they're going to put it into practice.
Yeah.
So in the book, in my new book, Jim.
Okay, yes, good. I was going to bring it up soon. Really?
Yeah. So I've just written this book with Peter, Luke, and Tony, and in the book, we kind of identify 3 areas that we feel are essential as part of teacher training in order for that training to have impact. And one of those areas we call the personal, and this is everything that deals with the teacher's kind of beliefs, assumptions, knowledge, and skills about teaching, but also everything to do with their particular teaching context.
Right.
And when trainers deal with this area, what they're trying to do is to kind of, first of all, bring out those beliefs and assumptions so that teachers can work with them and understand how they impact what they do. But also then, as I've just mentioned, to encourage the teacher to make those connections between, you know, what you're presenting or what you're asking them to work on and their own classroom, because every classroom is different, every teacher is different, and some of what you kind of present to them may be super appropriate. It might work really well, and other things may need some adaptation or some tweaking. But I think in nearly all cases, teachers are going to have to kind of experiment with it and try things out in the classroom, think about what worked and what didn't work in order to find a way that it's going to work for them. So this is another reason why I kind of dislike that approach to training that assumes teachers can just take something into the classroom and
Transmission model, right?
Yeah, and it's going to work straight away.
Yeah,
yeah.
Completely agree. It sounds like I remember I read a book, and it's probably the one book that changed my whole perspective on training. It was Trainer Development by Wright and Bolitho.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was written in like early 2000s, and it's not published by Cambridge or anything. It's self-published.
I think self-published, yeah.
And in that book, they talk about this, what you've spoken about, this, values, attitudes, and beliefs, and expectations, and realistically, what training should focus on is drawing them out so that teachers can not only understand what they think and what they do, and they can connect the training to that. And it sounds like the 3 areas that you've got in that book is extending that even more, which is excellent. I'm very much looking forward to reading it. I'm going to get it, and I'm going to review it and
do it.
And everyone will know more about it. I promise you. I had another question that I wanted to ask you about one of your blog posts, but it slips my mind. But no,
I'm sure it'll come back.
It will come back. It will come back. Yeah. Okay, so we've looked at some of the challenges of training in general. Let's look at some of the positive aspects. You mentioned that training and working with teachers is a privilege. I massively agree with that. Not only because I feel like it's a delicate situation to be able to provide feedback to teachers and work with them. It's also rewarding, but it's also, for me, I've learned so much about teaching from observing teachers. What are the other positive aspects for you of being in a teacher educator role?
I guess, I think I just enjoy being in a room with people that are really good at what they do. Yeah. So I think I enjoy this. This is true as a teacher and also as a trainer. So I enjoy seeing people learn. That's very rewarding. One thing that's quite interesting when you're a trainer is that you're kind of seeing how people do the same thing but do it differently in depending on where they work, or depending on the different constraints that they have to work under.
Yeah.
And I find that really interesting as well. I'm also really lucky working for Cambridge University Press and Assessment that we've got access to all of the kind of knowledge and expertise and resources that the university has. I think that's pretty rare for trainers. So very fortunate to have that. And working with other trainers, I think that's probably the thing that's benefited me most as a trainer, is working with others, like Peter, my co-author, or some of the others that I've worked on various courses or training days.
I think that's something that's potentially missing though, for many trainers. I remember I was at one of the teacher training education SIG meetings. I think it must have been last year now, and we were talking about the journey into teacher training. And for many of us there in that group, and I imagine that this could be applied to many teacher trainers, you kind of move into the role informally. There are some courses out there. So for example, the NIL MA, there's a trainer development module. There is the Cambridge teacher trainer, or train the trainer. And there are a number of other things out there, but in terms of a set qualification to say that you're a trainer, there's not really an industry standard. Interesting to note that there is the Cambridge Trainer Framework, which is quite interesting to look at. I just lost my train of thought. I was speaking too much.
They're working alone.
No, yes, exactly.
Or working with other trainers.
I think there are, and that's why I think that I'm not saying that COVID was a good thing, but one thing that it did do is it pushed a lot of these local communities, training communities, to be in sort of an international state. And so now we have, like, in the teacher training education SIG, there's like a meeting every month where trainers get together and we have a chat. And I think that's the important thing as a trainer for me, especially working in an internal in-house training context. So for example, getting other trainers' opinions on how to provide feedback to teachers, or making feedback on observations, whether it's positive or negative, impactful and delivered in the right way. I think that's one thing, in my opinion, that we need more of. And like you said, having those opportunities to work with other trainers must have been a phenomenal resource that we should be looking to get more of.
Definitely. Yeah, there must be ways of doing it. I was speaking to somebody recently about trying to foster more kind of local expertise. So in historically, I guess people in my role at Cambridge have kind of been flown out to far-flung places as the expert, and then deliver some training to people in a context that might be completely unfamiliar to me, right? Yeah, completely foreign, which is that's far from ideal. A much better model is to have people kind of, with the teaching expertise in that context, delivering the training. And this conversation that I had was about trying to bridge that gap, and trying to get some degree of expertise from outside the context, being like beamed in on Zoom or whatever it might be, with a locally based trainer in the room. And not for those two trainers to be kind of acting as equals and to prepare the session together, and deliver it together, which sounds to me like a really great idea. But I think it's a model that could work to kind of to foster more local expertise in teacher training, but also just to allow trainers to work with each other more. So I don't know if someone in your position could team up with someone else online that could.
Definitely. I mean, it sounds very much like a Delta for trainers, if you know what I mean. It'd be like almost a mentoring course for trainers. That'd be quite interesting to explore, I think.
I think, as I say, it shouldn't be a kind of there's not like a hierarchy there.
Yeah, right.
You just got two trainers who know different things coming together to deliver the session. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that would be really interesting to explore. If you have another brilliant idea, tell me. I'm over there.
Let's
Um,
follow.
Speaking about brilliant ideas, we're going to go back to your amazing book that you showed us just a moment ago.
Let me show it again.
Show it again. Show it again. Right. So you and Peter have authored this book, From Teacher to Trainer, which it seems quite familiar because the book from Andy Hockley, which was back from 2008, From Teacher to Manager. So we're continuing that with that, and it's about time that Cambridge had this book out. Right. So if we could just look at that for a second, what was the sort of the impetus for the book, and how did you go about? Because I mean, I imagine there must have been a lot of work that went into this. I mean, I was in contact with you a long time ago, and you're quite busy with this. So why did the book start, and how did you go about creating it, collecting all the information for it?
So the original impetus was the Train the Trainer course.
Right. Okay.
And kind of delivering that, and not having, well, first of all, everybody on the course, nearly every course we delivered, we'd be asked, can you give us some recommendations for further reading, or where can we learn more about X, Y, Z? And then there wasn't really one book that kind of did the job.
No.
And so that was one thing. And then the second thing was a sense, I guess, of driven by my own experience, kind of getting into training, but also Peter's and many others that we've spoken to, that there's not, you just want a bit more kind of guidance. When I did, I was a CELTA tutor in training. So when you do that process where you start becoming a CELTA tutor, the first thing that you do is shadow a CELTA course. So you kind of sit at the back of the training room and watch everything that goes on.
Right.
And that's kind of it. You have there are some tasks that you're supposed to do, and the lead trainer on the course is your supervisor, and they're the kind of person that decides whether you're ready at the end of it to then kind of co-deliver the next course. And it's I mean, you learn a lot from it, but it also kind of raises more questions than answers often, I think. And there's not a kind of, I had questions when I was doing that, and there was nowhere that I could go to kind of get a definitive answer on X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
So it's I guess there was an element of frustration that kind of gave rise to the book, and also a desire just to have something, maybe a starting point, for us as trainers. I'm not going to suggest that this is kind of the last word on teacher training, but maybe it's a place that we can start from, to kind of build on, and decide what's the essential knowledge that you need to be a trainer.
Yeah.
What's the evidence base for the stuff that we do in the training room, that kind of thing.
Brilliant. Excellent. And I imagine the process, I mean, I've spoken to quite a lot of course book writers and editors, and I know that the process for that is quite long, and there's a lot of work that goes into it. But for creating a teaching resource book like this for teachers or trainers, was that process quite long? Was there a lot of research that went into that? Was it based most on experience? What were some of the things that went into that?
Yeah, I mean, it was super long. It took years.
Yeah. Okay.
Took longer than it should have, probably. But yeah, it was. I think one of the big challenges was to try and work out what that kind of core knowledge would be, and to put some kind of structure to it as well, to put a kind of framework on it, which I feel like we did. But we started by looking at, we looked at the Train the Trainer course and all the content for that. We looked at similar courses like the Nile course. We looked at all the kind of back catalogue of teacher training work published by Cambridge and published by others, and just try to draw out as I say, this kind of core foundation of knowledge that new trainers would need. So it's, yeah, lots of research, lots of experience as well, and then drawing a little bit from outside ELT and looking at what happens in mainstream education,
Yeah.
when teachers are trained, and yeah, trying to make it as broad as possible in terms of its the ideas going into it.
Brilliant.
And then once we had that, it was the next step was to kind of come up with this framework and think about how we could put all of this into a digestible form for somebody that's a new trainer. And what I had in mind, I guess, when doing this was kind of lesson shapes that you learn when you're doing your initial teacher training, which help you to put a kind of, helps to give you a skeleton, and something to work from as you kind of get to grips with teaching. And there was nothing like that for trainers. So that's where we came up with this this idea of these 3 Ps. I mentioned the personal aspect, which is dealing with your beliefs, your knowledge, your skills, your individual context. The other 2 were the practical aspect, which involves kind of observing practice, whether it's another teacher or whether it's a trainer demonstrating something, and then applying practice as well. I think it's fairly obvious why that's important. And then the 3rd element was what we called the professional aspects, and this is where the research comes in, or the theory, or teaching terminology. So those 3 elements we feel are essential for teacher training to have impact.
That's excellent at drawing on the PPP. It's very, very, very similar.
Yeah, dangerously so, because it's not the same. It's not the same as the other PPP.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. The personal, the practical, and the professional. I like that. And you're right. I think back to my first year, I was perhaps only focusing on a minute area of the practical, if anything, of those 3 areas, and the practical being the teaching ideas, and whether they were relevant or teachers or not was not relevant to me. It was just ideas. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting framework to explore, and I look forward to working with that. I know that it's aimed at perhaps teachers, early career teacher educators, but I think even more experienced ones.
I hope there's
in the book as well.
Yeah, I hope there's stuff in there for people that have been training for a while as well, that it might help give them a new perspective on what they've been doing.
Brilliant. Okay, before we get to the last section of the Spanish Chat, which is looking at book recommendations, we always look at advice. Now, advice for teachers looking to move into teacher training, or early career teacher educators themselves. Obviously, the first piece of advice is buy the book and read it. But if you had 2 or 3 sort of off-the-cuff pieces of advice for those teachers that think that teacher training could be something for them, they maybe they're looking to experiment with it and try it out as a career, what would be your 2 or 3 main pieces of advice for them?
So the first one would be to work hard to create your own opportunities for training, and you can do that in your own context. You can volunteer to deliver a workshop, you can volunteer to mentor somebody. It might even just be, it doesn't have to be a kind of hierarchical relationship either. You might set up a lesson planning group with other teachers, and that's a start at just sharing ideas with people, which could be a good thing to do. And if you can kind of reach outside of your, the institution or institutions where you're working, you mentioned the IATEFL TT Ed group. That's a great one to go for. Or I use Twitter a lot, just to get ideas and be in touch with other people, other teacher trainers. just kind of reaching outside of your own context and seeing how people do things elsewhere, I
Yeah.
think is really useful, really helpful. And then once you start doing some training and doing those kinds of things, I guess my advice then would be to focus on the impact, focus on trying to help teachers take things away from your training that are going to make them better teachers in the long term. And if you can, then work with other trainers to get different, to get feedback on what you're doing, get their ideas, steal some ideas about how they do things. And if you can't do that, then ask the trainees, try and get that feedback from the trainees to find out what they thought was most successful, what could be improved, and so on. It's a very kind of self-directed role, I think, being a trainer. Often you don't get a lot of guidance often about what to do, and so you have to kind of take your cues from the people that you're training and the environment that you're in,
right?
And be prepared to kind of be quite autonomous.
Yeah, I certainly agree there. You obviously, we've both done Delta. You've done your MA. I'm doing my MA at the moment. In terms of other qualifications, many of the trainers that I've worked with have done some kind of diploma level qualification, like a Delta or DipTESOL. Some haven't. A lot of them have recommended doing something like a Delta to get that experience of having your teaching critically analyzed, but also the reflective element that's pushed on you to engage in. Is that something that you would recommend for teachers looking to move into teacher training, having some kind of getting involved in like a course on Delta or something like that? Or is it necessary, is perhaps my question.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend doing something. And I know that for many teachers, it's kind of prohibitively expensive doing Delta, but I think it's important to do. I think it's important to have some kind of further training, for two reasons really. I guess one is what you learn on the course, and the improvement that it gives to your own teaching, but also that you kind of draw on those experiences of being trained when you then go on to deliver training as well. So I think it makes you a better trainer. So yeah, if Delta is not an option, then seek out other opportunities. There are loads and loads of opportunities for free training online. Cambridge University Press is constantly doing free events, free webinars, and so on. Yeah. So I would say attend as many of those as you can. I think it's important if you can to be observed, and that's what you don't get if you're kind of doing a webinar. If you're attending a webinar, you might be getting a lot of the content and a lot of the ideas, but you're not necessarily getting somebody coming into your classroom and kind of looking at that. So maybe you can invite a colleague to come in and do that, so that you're kind of getting that aspect. But it's a tough one, because I know Deltas and MAs are not cheap, but I do feel that trainers need more than just their initial training, than just a CELTA to kind of work from.
I definitely agree. I know that it is expensive, and the thing is, I don't think you get that experience of having someone look at your teaching and then being provided feedback on your teaching from someone with such expertise, because we have to remember that Delta or DipTESOL trainers are very experienced within their fields. And I still think back onto those moments that I received feedback from those tutors, and I think back when I'm giving feedback now, and I try to emulate that. And they were really good models, at least in my experience. So yeah, I think that is really, really important.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last section is always book recommendations, one of my favorite parts of the Sponge Chats. The first one, can you throw it up? Right, there we go.
Can I recommend my own book? Is that allowed?
Yes, of course it's allowed.
Yeah, out now in all good bookshops.
Definitely, yeah. I've got it on my book list. It's coming. But thinking about perhaps other books in that are focused on training or trainer development. Are there any books that spring to your mind that would be good reads?
Yeah, there's one kind of standout book which I have here. It's Tessa Woodward's Models and Metaphors. I wonder if anyone else has recommended this one.
You know, this is the first time that someone has recommended this one. I haven't actually read this, but I've heard very good things about it, so I need to get my hands on it.
Yeah, I think this is brilliant. I think everything that Tessa Woodward writes is brilliant. She has a very kind of conversational style and a very kind of personal style. Right. So you kind of feel like she's training you one-on-one.
That's good.
When you're reading the book, which is really nice. This one is special for a few reasons. So first of all, she kind of outlines the idea of loop input, right, where the process and the content of your session are the same. So if you're trying to train teachers on eliciting, then you do a lot of eliciting as part of the session, something like that. Yeah. And so she manages to, she's got a whole load of kind of, they're not session plans, but they're just ideas or examples of how to put this into practice, right, in the book. And that's really interesting. But she also has a whole load of other kind of ideas and insights into training at the beginning of the book. So it's, yeah, I think probably this book more than any other influenced my ideas about training. Right. Another one is Randall and Thornton's book,
Advising and Supporting Teachers.
Yes, yeah. So when it comes to observation and giving feedback, that was the kind of the one I found most useful for that.
Yeah, that book is, I have it on my desk. We just finished observation period. Every observation period, I go back to it and think about how I'm going to deliver feedback. And it's one of those, I mean, I read it from front to back, but I go back to it looking at different sections now. I think a few other people have recommended this as well. So
yeah, on the list. It's quite a long book. I feel like they probably could have conveyed the same ideas.
It's a read
in fewer pages. It's
definitely a read.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
And there's one other which is which I found really good for kind of planning courses or working with teachers over longer stretches of time, which is, it's by Angie Maldarez and Martin Waddell. Teaching Teachers, it's called.
Teaching Teachers. Okay, this always comes up on my Amazon. It always comes up on my Amazon page to buy, but it's a bit, I think it's quite pricey, this book.
Yeah, it's not cheap. Yeah. It's not cheap. See if you can get it from a library somewhere. It's it's also quite theoretical, but I think it's quite useful kind of theory for teacher trainers. One thing that they talk about is how teachers learn, and the idea of 3 types of knowledge. So they talk about the idea of knowing about, which is kind of just knowing facts and ideas, knowing how, which is like knowing how to put those into practice. Yeah. And then the third level is kind of knowing to, which is when it becomes automatic and you know when to do these things in the classroom. Okay. And it's quite a useful model. Peter and I borrowed it for our book. Okay. So you can kind of save the you can get the condensed version here first, and then if you're interested, go and check it out in the original source. Brilliant.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this. Woodward's book and the last book that you showed, I definitely need to get my hands on them. I'm about to do the trainer development module with Niall, so
Oh, great.
they will definitely come in handy. So we'll see how we go. I'm sure they have a reading list with like 100 books long anyway.
Yeah, and I think they may have a kind of e-library, Niall.
Yeah.
So they might be able to get copies to you.
Yeah, I'm because I'm doing the core module with them at the moment, and they have all like these free resources to the subscription journals, and I was like, oh, this is so amazing. Anyway, it's something that when you have access to these things and looking at all the stuff, it was one of the good things of signing onto the MA, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of take that stuff for granted because we get it through the University of Cambridge. But it's a massive benefit to have all of that.
Yeah, not jealous at all. Not jealous at all. All right, Matt. It has been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to talk to you.
Likewise, thanks, Jim.
Thank you very much for being here. What I'm going to do is I'll put a link to not only to the book in the blog post and in the description, but I'll also put a link to some of your blog posts on the Cambridge Better World of Learning. Yes.
World of Better Learning.
World of Better Learning. There we go. World of Better Learning. Some of your blogs that you've put on there, and you've got some really interesting blogs about some of the concepts of teacher training, which are quite useful. And you touch on loop input there as well.
Yes.
So I'll put some links down to that as well, and I'll put links to those other books that you recommended. I do hope that we get to meet up again face to face somewhere in the world sometime in the future. But until then, enjoy fatherhood, and we'll speak again soon.
Thanks a lot, Jim. Take care.
Take care. Bye.